Today, I'm delighted to say I'm joined by the theologian, author, and Bible communicator, Andrew Ollerton, someone who's made it his mission to help people engage with Scripture in a way that's both intellectually honest and spiritually enriching. His latest book is called God's Book, an honest look at the Bible's 7 toughest topics. And in that book, he doesn't shy away from the hard questions, from creation and science to sexuality, suffering, and divine judgment. Andrew invites readers into a deeper conversation about the parts of the Bible that often raise eyebrows or even doubts. So whether you're a lifelong believer, a curious skeptic, or somewhere in between, this is a book that promises to challenge assumptions. And to talk about it in more detail, I'm delighted to say Andrew is with us now. Andrew, first of all, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, James. It's good to be with you. Yeah, and thanks for introducing the book so well. I think the parts of the Bible do raise eyebrows and even doubts, so I'm glad to talk about it.
So let's talk about the book in a bit more detail then. What inspired you to write it?
Well, I think a couple of things. I've helped a lot of people through other resources like the Bible course and my first book on the Bible, help people to make sense of the big story of the Bible, Genesis to Revelation. And that's great. They've got more people engaged with Scripture. But obviously, when they do engage with Scripture, they then often bump into things that can be really challenging. And a lot of that's in the Old Testament, but not exclusively at all. Things that include issues like warfare and violence in the Bible, along with the issue of suffering and all the things you've mentioned. So I wanted to write a book that almost looped back through the same story that I've helped people get into and said, imagine you're now going through the Bible. Let me tackle with you the most likely roadblocks that could prevent your journey from getting through. You know, what are the things that you could bump into that could stop you in your tracks and make you feel like, I just don't know if this is really God's book. I don't know how to make sense of this today. So that's why I wrote it. And I guess in that sense, if I'm honest, I'm partly writing it to my younger self. I think this is the book I wish I'd read when I was sort of, late teens, early 20s. I grew up in a Christian home, so I was grateful to have an introduction to the Bible that was very positive. But I'd never really grappled with the difficult things, and I wasn't ready for it when they came up in conversation. So this is the book I wish I'd read then.
Well, Andrew, let me just quickly run through the 7 topics. We've got science and creation. We've got slavery, got warfare and violence, why God allows people to suffer, do miracles and exorcisms really happen? There's a chapter as well on sexuality and identity, and also a chapter about judgment, hell, and the afterlife. Now, of course, all of those in their own way have been controversial and still are heavily debated topics. How did you pick those topics, though? Were there any contenders that didn't make the final cut?
Well, I think I wanted to firstly let the Bible shape the book and the narrative. I wanted to go Genesis to Revelation. So part of it is literally just as you go on that journey, what will you bump into? And the first thing is Genesis, and the first 2 chapters are creation stories. How do we reconcile those with modern science? So in a sense, some topics pick themselves. They just are. They are the Bible story. And at the same time, I'm not pretending that if you lived in medieval England or if you lived today in North Korea, I'm not pretending that these would be the topics then or there. I'm saying these are the topics here and now. These are the things that I think most disturb modern Western sensibilities that have been trained by culture, and I would argue by Scripture itself, ironically, to see the world in a certain way. And therefore, when we read certain things in the Bible, we really struggle with that. So in a sense, the Bible set the narrative. And then on the other hand, I'm honest and clear that it's culture that also sets the narrative, because what we find disturbing in the Bible, but the Bible is what it is. It's not changing its structure or story for us. But what we find disturbing in it changes according to modern cultural sensibilities. And so are there topics that weren't included? Yes, certainly. But I was trying, for example, when I got to Paul's letters, partly because I wanted to, half of me wanted to dodge the bullet of addressing the issue of sexuality, which is one of the most contentious issues in our culture. I did wonder about the other problem, which is that is often picked up in Paul's letters of God's sovereignty and human free will, predestination debates. But if I'm honest, I just thought your average person is far more concerned about what the Bible teaches about sex than predestination. So Look, I've tried to be honest. I've tried not to dodge any bullets. I've tried to go for what I genuinely believe are the 7 toughest topics in the Bible for people today.
I'm pleased that you've brought this out now, because we've spoken in the past briefly about the Bible Society's Quiet Revival research, and it does look like there is at least increased interest in the Bible at the moment. But you're right in saying that some of these topics cause people to ask some really serious questions. Do you think this is a really good time for the church and for Christians to be talking about how the Bible differs from the messages that our culture is trying to get across to us?
Absolutely. And just to pick, absolutely right, just to pick up on the Quiet Revival, it's interesting. A lot of the positive headlines have made news. But in the report itself, we also pick up on some of the challenges. So, for example, just staying with the Bible, it's positive that 26% of the UK population say they would like to understand the Bible for themselves. That's up to 34% for young men today. So there's a huge interest in the Bible. And I've been giving talks often entitled, "The Bible is Trending." And I think this is happening. The Bible is trending. There is a new interest in it. A lot more public influences are positively wanting to be identified with it. Bible sales are up. I'm meeting more and more young men and young women who are saying they've just bought Bibles on Amazon and they're reading it. They want to see what it has to offer. But here's the interesting thing. The Quiet Revival also picks up on the flip side of the coin, which is the challenge. So the Bible is both our opportunity and it's our challenge. 24% of young people in the church, within the church context, 24% say they have less confidence in the Bible than they used to. And this one really got my attention. 35% of 18s to 34s who are in the church, these are church-going young people, say that when they read certain parts of the Bible, it undermines their faith. I found that really interesting, that we've almost somehow, we've created a faith, presumably in Jesus, a version of Jesus that we have come to believe in, but it's a faith that can actually be undermined by certain parts of the Bible. Now, that for me is a really important little indicator that we have to help God's people engage with the whole of God's story, the whole of Scripture. And that starts young. We've got to not shelter people from the fact that there are just difficult things in the Bible. I don't believe they're deal breakers. I don't believe they're faith breakers. But I do believe that if we leave them unaddressed, they can be, because they can come back to bite us later on in life when we actually haven't really thought it through for ourselves, and we only find skeptical voices are then in our ear. So I think now is a really great time to both be confident about the Bible. We can be on the front foot. It's trending again, but also to be honest about the Bible. You will find some difficult things in it. That is not a problem to your faith. You know, in the end, we don't believe the Bible because we like it. I really want to emphasize this. I think this is so important. You know, I don't trust the Bible because I just think it's lovely or agreeable. There are parts of the Bible I don't like, I don't find easy, but I trust the Bible for better reasons than just that I like it. That would be so subjective and so fickle. I trust it in part because Jesus believed it, and he believed in the Old Testament and taught it and trusted it clearly. So we've got better reasons for believing the Bible than just that I like it. And now is a great time to really grapple with it, including the difficult bits.
Well, let's just very quickly pick up on a couple of the difficult bits. As we said, there are 7 topics in total in the book that you get to grips with. Let's talk briefly about the first one, which is, in effect, science versus creation. It's the question I'm always asking scientists about on this program. Can the Bible and science exist without being in conflict? Do you think that the two are speaking different languages?
Well, there is a measure of truth in that. You know, I think there is a different, whether you want to use the metaphor of different languages or I use the metaphor of answering different questions, you know, that there is a sense in which science is focused on the how questions, the more mechanistic questions. There's a sense in which, in that sense, science is more of a left brain activity, to use that, or left hemisphere, to use that picture as well. It's more mechanistic. So if science can tell us how mechanisms work, the Bible is telling us the meaning of life, and they're not the same thing. You can't work out the meaning of life by uncovering mechanism. You can work out more of the wonder and mystery of life, the implausible fact that we're here at all having this conversation. These things point to something mysterious and something other than what the material world can explain. But you can't work out the meaning of life. And I think if we think about Genesis more answering the why questions and science the how questions, or Genesis at least answering the why and the who, who behind it all and who are we as human beings, then I think there's no necessary conflict. Now, I'm honest in the book to say that I do believe there are certain tension points and touch points. In the section on creation, the creation stories, I outline where I think there are touch points, meaning that the story told in creation actually seems to be aligning with and coming into closer proximity with the scientific consensus. It is, in some instances, the more science is discovering about the universe, the more it points to the kind of story that Genesis articulates, whether that's the Big Bang or fine-tuning of the cosmos or the mystery of human consciousness. There are some things that actually point towards, and many scientists acknowledge this. But there are also tension points. I'm honest about both. There's touch points where they're coming closer together. There are tension points, and that includes things like the age of the Earth, for example, or the evolution debate and dilemma. These can be points of tension as well. So I'm not saying it's all plain sailing. I'm not saying every finding of science aligns neatly. What I am saying is that the more you delve into it, the more you realize that even the most sophisticated scientists, the most advanced scientists, recognize there are mysteries, and I'm not just talking God of the gaps here. I'm talking about the fact that the very things we can and do understand point to something beyond the material universe. And that aligns with Genesis.
Let's take another topic that you focus on in the book, suffering. Again, it's an age-old question. How do you think biblical stories of suffering can help us to navigate our own pain?
Well, I think part of the argument of my book is that these topics are best understood in their context, and the best context in which to address suffering in the Bible is undoubtedly the experience of exile for Israel, if you like, of experience of suffering. And Assyrian armies in turn destroy their homeland, and in the Babylonian exile, they're led away as effectively as refugees or political prisoners, you might say. And so, they reach a really deep place, a dark place. And my point is, out of that darkness comes some of the most beautiful, brilliant, and helpful literature in the whole Bible. It's interesting, isn't it, that far from the Bible editing out the difficult moments, it seems to almost write a literary monument to record Israel's defeat and the deep experience of lament, of suffering, of pain, and how somehow mysteriously in all of that, God drew close. I highlight the biography of Ezekiel particularly, who was on course to be honored on his 30th birthday as a priest in the order, in a high priestly order, serving at the altar in the temple. Instead, because of the Babylonian invasion, he spent his 30th year by the rivers of Babylon, in exile, in the dark place. And yet, it was precisely then and there, in the pain, in the difficulty, in the brokenness, that God gave Ezekiel extraordinary visions. And people have questioned Ezekiel's sort of mental state. Did he have some kind of mental, condition? Many people have and my point is, well, perhaps he did, but what would you expect when you've been effectively hijacked from your homeland and taken to a foreign land? But here's the thing: God used the man who was broken. And I think there's such a message there for us, that instead of thinking the Bible affirms this kind of smooth path of life, if you trust God and do the right things, you'll be blessed. The Bible showcases stories like Job, like Ezekiel, and ultimately like Jesus himself, a man of sorrows, familiar with suffering, and says, actually, in the brokenness, you will be blessed, because there God will meet you. And in that sense, it's not, I do give some of the classic responses, and I address some of the classic responses to the problem of evil and the problem of pain. But in the end, I don't believe the Bible is primarily some kind of philosophical or logical argument. It is a story etched in the real biographies of people like Ezekiel that gives hope to those whose story is one of brokenness and suffering, to say, actually, don't think those are the reasons that you can't experience God. Turn that round. Maybe the brokenness and the pain is precisely the reason that you can experience God.
It's been a fascinating interview, Andrew. As we begin to bring it to a close, how do you hope this book will help Christians to engage with those who are becoming interested in the story of the Bible, but who have always struggled to get over some of these big topics?
I've been thinking a lot about the story of Philip and the Ethiopian eunuch in Acts 8 recently, and I think I like to think that my book will hopefully play a role for both characters. The Ethiopian eunuch represents a very elite, sophisticated, highly educated man in his private chariot reading, in his case, a portion of the Bible, but he can't make sense of it on his own. When Philip comes alongside him and says, "Do you understand what you're reading?" You can hear his almost frustration. "How can I?" he says, "unless someone explains it to me." So I believe there are more and more spiritually curious people coming down the road in our cultural moment. People who are honest. They're not trying to be difficult. They actually would like the Bible to make sense. But on their own, they get stuck. They struggle. And sometimes it's because of these difficult topics. So I hope my book will almost be something that comes alongside those who are spiritually curious and helps them make sense. But equally, if you think about the role of Philip in the story, he had to be ready. He was equipped. Somehow he'd come to know the scriptures well enough that he could sit down next to this Ethiopian man and just on the fly, without any preparation, just help him talk from where he was at to where he needed to get to. I don't think a lot of Christians feel confident to do that. And I want to help people grow in confidence. I want to feel like, yeah, you can equip yourself, not to shy away from these conversations in case something comes up and you don't know how to answer. This book will help you feel more confident to say, actually, I've thought this through a bit, and here's a helpful response. So in short, I hope it will help both the curious seeker, like the Ethiopian eunuch, and the believer who wants to become confident, like Philip. And in particular, I actually finished each of the 7 parts of my book with a letter to a young adult, because I wanted to also capture this sense that young people, especially, we need to help young people to really get to grips with difficult topics, not avoid them, and not shy away. I don't want anyone. I just feel sometimes people hide from certain parts of the Bible, fearing that there might be things there that they don't want to see, or they can't make sense of, or they can't handle. I don't want anyone to feel like that. This book is effectively saying, let's go to the most difficult places in the whole Bible, and let's see that when we put them in their context, these things can still make sense and ultimately lead us to Jesus.
It's been a fascinating discussion today. Andrew Ollerton is the author of the book, God's Book, an honest look at the Bible's 7 toughest topics. It's available from our friends at Hod of Faith. Andrew Ollerton, thank you very much for joining us on the programme today.
Thank you, James.